Hi, I'm Jonas, and today I'm going to talk about some of the production techniques I used on my project called STRUCT. So STRUCT was produced specifically for immersive audio. That might not be as straightforward as it sounds, because I work in a hybrid way where I use a lot of electronic production elements, which happen all in a stereo environment. So this means we need to adapt a technique called audio decorrelation. Decorrelation means converting a single audio source into multiple audio signals. Because it's such a hybrid project where I use a lot of in-the-box electronic production, but also a lot of recorded content, I was able to explore a lot of different techniques ranging from very traditional immersive audio recording techniques to applying a lot more creative decorrelation techniques. So one of the more traditional techniques I did was when I was recording shallow. The technique I used is probably the most straightforward in immersive audio recording. The way I approached this was using a 5-channel array. This means that I had 5 mics, which I placed like a 5-1 setup. So for the main LCR, that is left, center, right, I had some sort of a scaled down deca tree formation with 3 large diaphragm condensers. And for the surrounds, I used 2 small diaphragm condensers. So a fun thing to experiment with recordings like these is, for example, delaying some of the channels, and this will completely change the shape of the room, or at least of the virtual room that your recording happens in, since you're basically altering the phase between the channels. So in general, this is a very traditional way of recording for immersive audio, and it will consistently yield pretty good results. The only issue for my hybrid production is that it immediately anchors the recording to a certain room, because you're basically capturing the reflections of the room you are recording. So one of the issues with this is that if you have a lot of additional electronic production or other recorded elements, there might be some inconsistencies between the spaces these elements are in. Another technique I used is mono recording, and I cannot state this enough, but for immersive productions, mono recordings are so overpowered, especially when you're working in a hybrid environment. So this technique is super easy to do because you literally need a single mic and a single instrument. This will sort of be a solution to the problem we have with multi-channel array recording. In one of the tracks I produced, there is this large, lush string section. All of these strings were actually played by a single violin player. So I told my friend Alex, who played the violin, to play single note bends. And then we recorded every note and layered these on top of each other to create these chords. So every single note or every single string player is recorded in mono, and this gives you so much freedom in the mixing process later on, because now you have full freedom to decide where every string player is sitting, and you're not even limited to what's physically possible. If you want, you can put a bunch of string players in the top speakers. So in the case of this track, it sort of generally builds over the length of the track and then ends in this climax where all these string chords play. So this gave me the opportunity to get very creative. Since I have a mono recording of every string player, I can basically create this cloud of strings sitting around the listener. And so a lot of these are just sitting in the bed, but for a lot of them I also made individual objects to really envelop the listener, even though every recording was just mono. So an important thing to take note of is that since we are doing mono recordings, especially the way I did, they were in a very dry space. So there is no sense of space at all. But this gives you the freedom to experiment by placing it in a room yourself by using reverb plugins. So in this way, you can fully integrate it in the hybrid production, and that's a big plus of the technique. And that way, the space in your mix will sound very consistent, just like if you were to record everything in the same space using immersive recording techniques. Let's move on to some of the more electronic production techniques I did. We're now moving on from recordings and using in-the-box production techniques. This regards mainly like soft synths and instrument libraries, since all of these are basically just stereo. For my own production, I like to use Ableton, since it gives me a lot of freedom for all the sound design I do. But the issue is that Ableton enforces stereo, and it doesn't natively support any immersive formats. And this makes things a lot less practical. Regardless of this, I still used a bunch of different techniques to decorrelate my stereo signals. So this piano sound is sort of a through line throughout the whole project, and it comes back in a lot of tracks. So I had to find a way, since it's one of the main elements, to decorrelate the signal and give it some more sense of depth and space. The piano here is just a library, since I wasn't able to record any real piano for the project. And this library is just stereo. So to still be able to decorrelate my signal, I created these parallel effect chains. And these have some subtle creative delay and reverb effects, which I can then send to different speakers or objects to create more of a sense of space. So sometimes I took this a bit far and made the decorrelated signals sound pretty different from the original, but in the end I made sure the decorrelated signal would always carry some of the DNA of the original. On some of the tracks on the project, I experimented with doing some more abstract vocal processing. So on some of the tracks I experimented by morphing vocals with this sort of futuristic metallic sound design.
I can't see.
So just like with the piano, I use this as a parallel chain, which I then bounce separately once I go into the Atmos mix. So overall, I like to keep my vocals pretty frontal in the mix. But using these techniques, I was able to sort of expand them into the Y speakers or the surrounds. So in short, it's all about getting creative with parallel processing when you're trying to decorrelate the stereo signal. Some final notes I have on this. In the end, it's important to realize that not every element in the track should become a multi-channel signal. There is nothing wrong with having mono or stereo elements sitting somewhere in the mix, and I actually encourage it, especially for elements that have more of a supporting role. For me personally, I like to give my main elements in a mix sort of some more decorrelated content, because it makes them stand out just a bit more, but also it ties the whole mix a bit more together.